Okay, so I think we should be beginning now. So I'll begin. All right. Okay, here goes. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chandani Jaswal, and on behalf of the Museum of British Colonialism, United Kingdom, Kenya, I welcome you to Museums and Partition, South Asian Perspectives, a joint discussion between museums in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Thank you so much for joining us. And before I go on to introduce our esteemed panelists and ourselves, a bit of historical context to the theme of our discussion today for our foreign audience members. So British India, located in South Asia, was a colony of the British East India Company and laterally the Imperial Crown from 1757 to 1947. Upon independence in August 1947, British India was divided along the western, that is Punjab, and the eastern front, that is Bengal. Two independent nations were born in August 1947, India and Pakistan. Thereon, in December 1971, East Pakistan declared itself an independent country called Bangladesh. Thus, 2021-2022 are milestone years for the subcontinent, marking 75 years of independence for India and Pakistan and 50 years for Bangladesh. This is rather a simplistic view of the subcontinent. Our histories, culture, and experiences run much deeper than this. To look further into these facets, I now introduce our expert panelists, leading organizations in their respective countries who have been working on archiving this era of history and will be sharing their insights with us today. We have Ms. Alia Taibi, Head of Research and Archiving at the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, connected with us from Karachi. Welcome, Ms. Taibi. Next, we have Ms. Rumela Ganguly, Oral Historian and Communication Manager at the 1947 Partition Archive, a digital platform based in India and the United States. Welcome, Ms. Ganguly. From Bangladesh, we have Dr. Razina Begum, Manager of Research and Library at the Liberation War Museum in Dhaka. She's joined by the co-founder of the museum, author and cultural activist, Mr. Mofudil Haq, who will be taking over for the Q&A session. I welcome you, Mr. Haq and Dr. Begum. And finally, Dr. Rituparna Roy, academic author and initiator of the Kolkata Partition Museum, connected with us from Kolkata, India. Welcome, Dr. Roy. And I am Chandani Jaswal, a first-year postgraduate student of history and a communication team member at the Museum of British Colonialism, a joint UK-Kenyan initiative striving to communicate a more truthful account of British colonialism using digital technology. We are an entirely volunteer and donation-driven enterprise. I will be moderating this discussion. A few cardinal rules. There will be 4 discussion themes for which each panelist will have 5 minutes to speak. This will be followed by a Q&A session for the audience. You're requested to put your questions in the chat box and our team will take those up from there. Please ensure that your microphones and cameras are switched off for the discussion. Sorry. Sorry about that, siblings, I tell you, always taking out for problems in the last minute. Sorry. So I'll go with the rules again. A few cardinal rules. There will be 4 discussion themes for which each panelist will have 5 minutes to speak. This will be followed by a Q&A session for the audience. You're requested to put your questions in the chat box and our team will take those up from there. Please ensure that your microphones and cameras are switched off during the duration of the discussion. Now, without further ado, I'll be handing over to the panelists. So let's begin with the most basic question. How has your institution worked towards archiving the history of 1947 and 1971 respectively? And why is this process of archiving history important? We'll start with Alia. Citizens Archive of Pakistan. Over to you, Ms. Taibi.
Hi everyone, my name is Alia Tayyebi and I work at the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, where I manage the oral history project and the digital archives and look after research. I joined the team in 2014. The project started in 2007, and when it started with a very basic query, and that was that the history that we were hearing was very different from the history that we were reading. And we realized that there was a gap here that needed to be filled. And with that thought in mind, a group of individuals got together and decided to go and collect that story which we were hearing and not reading. And thus the Oral History Project was born. Since its inception, CAP has digitized over 4,000 oral histories of people who remember the formative years of Pakistan and remember 47, the partition of India. And we have over 400,000 images which help us in our idea of storytelling. And this includes personal donations of photographs, memorabilia, letters, newspapers, etc. So this is my story to begin off with. And as we progress further into the conversation, I'll tell you more about us.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Taibi. So now I'll be handing over to Rumela from the 1947 Partition Archive. Rumela, the same question. Why is archiving 1947 and 1971 important, and how has 1947 Partition Archive worked towards it?
Thank you so much for the question, Chandni. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Good morning. My name is Rumela, and today I'm joining you from the 1947 Partition Archive. So coming to Chandni's question, why the work of archiving is important. So it is important because archiving work has not been done before in that scale, specifically on the topic of partition until 2010. So archiving, as we all know, is about preservation, and that preservation has the main purpose to serve the future generation who can come back to the stories, come back to the oral history documents and learn from them, get to know and have a better idea of the time period that we are talking about. It's very important to do archiving because it ignites research, which is once again a very important aspect for all generations to come. And the work that we have done since 2008 at the 1947 Partition Archive, we have seen that how our work has popularized film, museum, and other projects. So I believe that is where archiving plays an important role.
Thank you, Rumela. I'll now be going to Dr. Begum from the Liberation War Museum in Bangladesh. Dr. Begum, the same question. How has your institution worked towards, and because Liberation War Museum is strictly about 1971, so how has your institution worked towards archiving 1971? And why is it important that we archive this period of history in the subcontinent?
The Liberation Museum is the outcome of citizen efforts. The prime objective of the museum is to make the new generation aware about the spirit and aspiration of for which their forefathers had fought. It also encourages them to take a stand against violence, violation of human rights, and the acts of genocidal carried out in Bangladesh and its prevention in any part of the world.
Thank you, Dr. Begum. And I'll now be going to Dr. Roy to talk about her work and Kolkata Partition Museum. Same thing. Why is it important to archive this period of history?
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Kolkata. I would like to first thank the Museum of British Colonial Rule for inviting us to be a part of this panel, and I speak on behalf of the Trust. This Kolkata Partition Museum, this project, which I initiated in 2016 and which formally began in 2018, and we started work as an organization in 2019 actively. We have a very different agenda. We have three unique agenda in trying to do this. Two main, I would say. First is to fill up a lacuna in partition studies and memorialization. And the second is to change the discourse of partition a bit. So our two primary emphasis, we want to establish a partition museum in Kolkata focused on the Bengal experience. Now, our two main emphasis is historical specificity and cultural continuity. Historical specificity, let me just explain. The experience of Bengal, the partition experience of Bengal has been very different from that of the Punjab. Not just the event itself, but also its aftermath and afterlives. And this is something very few people know outside of Bengal and those who work on it. So we felt a tremendous compelling urge to do so. The second is that we want to change the discourse around partition a bit. So it has been overwhelmingly about rupture, but we want to also emphasize cultural continuity. Because though we've had very different political trajectories as post-colonial entities, our living heritage remains the same on the Bengal side, at least. And by living heritage, I mean language, literature, food, fabric, the performative arts, which is not a small thing. So we want to emphasize this continuity even as we memorialize the rupture, and we believe in the importance of the arts in preserving cultural memory, which is what we have been trying to do with all our events. And we just launched a virtual partition museum, a collaboration between our trust and an architecture firm headed by the Indian architect Orhujot. And what we are trying to do there is we are memorializing not just 47, but all the three partitions of Bengal, 1905, 47, and 71. So we have, in a way, a kind of transnational agenda, you could say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. So that was a bit of an introduction to all the four organizations that we have with us today. And now that we know a bit about all the four organizations and what each of these leading organizations are trying to strive and achieve in their respective countries, I think now it's time that we go a bit into the subcontinent-oriented discussions and topics. And I'll begin with the one which has gripped the subcontinent of late, and that is that popular view says, like Dr. Roy said, that most petition stories tend to focus on the Punjab side of the petition, sidelining stories in, say, Sindh, which lies in Pakistan today, or Bengal, which is Bangladesh and West Bengal in India today, or the princely states, which are scattered across the subcontinent. So I'll again begin with each of the organizations, and what is your view about this East versus West divide of Punjab being more chronicled in history and Bengal being less, or how has your organization worked towards negating this myth, or any other work that you've been doing respectively for Sindh or princely states or Bengal? So again, I'll now shift the order a bit. We'll start with Rumela. Rumela, if you could please go ahead.
Sure, Chandni, thank you for that question. So I think that this is a myth that we have been believing for the last decade probably, that partition. When we talk about partition, we only talk about the experiences of Punjab, and Bengal has not been systematically documented. So our organization, the 1947 Partition Archive, actually has worked for the last 10 years, 12 years in breaking that myth, if it existed at all. If you go into the archive, you will see that we have been able to document stories both from the eastern side as well as from the western side. So we have documented stories from Bangladesh, we have documented stories from West Bengal, and even in the northeastern part, which we believe that otherwise has been underrepresented in the narrative of partition. Now the question here is, like, when we are talking about Punjab and Bengal, we are trying to put it in a binary way, like, okay, when we talk about partition, it has to be about Bengal, it has to be about Punjab. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because when we look into the oral histories, we will understand that the disruption happened from Afghanistan down to Sri Lanka and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So we at the archive have holistically approached this, and we have tried to come out of this understanding or this myth that when we talk about partition, we only talk about Punjab, and there has been a misrepresentation or there has been unheard stories from Bengal. It is absolutely not the case when we talk about our organization specifically, because as I said, if you go into our website, you will be able to understand that we have equally documented stories from both sides. And not only that, we have gone beyond the subcontinent. So it's not only about Punjab, Bengal, or Kashmir, or stories from down south. We have documented stories from Zimbabwe, we have documented stories from New Zealand, Australia, United States, United Kingdom. time for us to come out of this narrative that, when we talk about partition, there is this binary, the East versus West, and to approach it as one of the largest crises in human history, and to talk about it and to understand that at least we have worked to, come out of this situation and to able to kind of record stories from all over the world in that way.
Thank you, Rumela. That was quite insightful, and I'll be asking the same question to Alia from CAP. So Alia, over to you. If Suhail could please unmute, ma'am. Thank you.
So if I were to look at this question, the thing is that when we look at popular history, we look at regions where a mass number of movement has taken place for us to club it into collective wholes. And because the partition, when it happened, most of the movement took place on the borders of Punjab, and some was the borders of Bengal. And because the borders of Punjab was so violent or bloodied, it just became a sensationalized version of history. But it is only when we started tapping into oral histories is that when many nuanced versions of history came forth. This includes like people who were living in princely states, what was their journey like? People who were already living in partitioned lands across, the new borders, what was their experiences like of having refugees come in? So it's definitely a much larger lens through which you are looking at. I remember one of the stories that I have is about this gentleman who was studying to go to the United States in 1946 and was supposed to come back to South Asia in 1948. And when he was exiting, he had to write where he would be entering from, because the place that he was leaving behind was United India, or British India. And when he would come back, it could either be India or Pakistan. And he remembered that he opted for Karachi, maybe Pakistan, like there was a clause there which said that if it is by the time he comes back partitioned, and if it is Pakistan, he'd still like to come to Karachi, So you do have these little nuggets of information that come your way. And one of the reasons, or one of the most interesting things about history that I've discovered as an oral historian is that there is generic documented history, which is a lens of looking at history from high politics. And then there is the human history, which is history that is experienced by a large number of people or by individuals who are inhabiting a land, to give us a lens or a flavor of what it was like to be living there at that moment in time, to have those experiences and have those experiences transmitted as information which might or might not prove useful. Because one of the questions that one needs to ask oneself is, what is the reason for documenting history? Because when we look at an anthropological lens of studying sociology and history, it comes across as a very colonial mindset of conquering land and finding weaknesses, exploitation. But when we are now in the 21st century looking at history, we're trying to look at it from a lens of learning. And if we are looking at it from a lens of learning, then we have to be very mindful of what are the things that one can learn. And for example, I remember one of my most favorite stories of partition is of this gentleman, of this family who was leaving Punjab, which was being partitioned. And as they were leaving, their neighbors giving them jars of food to take, because, and this is an exchange between two religiously separate groups, and the women understanding the need for food for a journey which could take a long time, and the idea of sustenance. So what's a story is not just the family which survived the partition, but also the humanity that still manages to surface itself out. And it is through these little snippets of looking at a particular lens that we can understand what are the things that we can learn from history and go forth. Exactly in the same ways, if I were to pick on what Rumela said about rupture, ruptures are created by external force, which breaks the norms of a society and creates now new patterns. And these patterns oftentimes are not completely different from the ones that were left behind, but on the contrary, are a resurfacing or a reshaping of existing structures. For us to understand how those new structures are being formed or created or morphing, we need to understand where they begin from. And it is by these nuanced flavors of micro level of looking at historical literature or human experiences that one can come across very interesting elements of historical documentation.
Thank you, Alia, for that answer. And I especially like the story about you sharing how this gentleman who was to come back in 48 did not actually know where he would be. That is, and I think that is something that no matter how much we try, looking at it 75 years later, no amount of sympathy or sensitization can ever help us experience what people must have experienced at that time. And I think that is what makes the work that your organizations are doing even more important. So thank you all for organizations for the work that you're doing. I'll be asking the same question now to Dr. Roy, Kolkata Partition Museum. And like Dr. Roy, you mentioned in your opening stance that there is this thing of Bengal being a little sidelined. If I'm not entirely sidelined, but Punjab taking over most topics. So now Kolkata Partition Museum working entirely towards Bengal. How do you view this divide, and what are the steps that you're taking to mitigate this in popular dialogue?
When you say there is this Punjab bias and whether or not it exists, I think there are two sides to the question. One is the academic study of partition and the work that is being done by organizations like us. And the other is the popular conception and understanding of the subject. So I'll first come to the first thing. So I completely agree with Rumela that, this is a misconception as far as the academic study of partition is concerned, and as far as organizational work on partition is concerned, that work has been done only on the Punjab. That's not true. Since I'm an academic myself and I'm a little more attuned to that, if you just see history writing of the last 20, 30 decades, there have been very interesting new shifts from causes, as Alia was saying, from generic history to popular history to history of human stories. That is a turn that had happened from the 80s, 90s onwards. So the shift had happened initially from national to regional history, and then it incorporated, explored experiences of women for the first time in the 90s, and then Dalits. And then there was, whole new research on borders and border making, as well as recently in the last decade, questions of diaspora and decolonization. So history was more capacious in the last 20, 30 years in the range of aspects of partition that has been dealing with, and also the nature of actual experiences that it has incorporated within its inquiry. And a major shift happened, I think, in the post-millennial years with the work of CAP and the 1947 Partition Archive, what they have done is, oral histories were previously retrieved by historians as well. But what these organizations have done is that they have opened up the field to citizen historians to honor the people's history. Previously, the retrieving of oral histories was a disciplinary enterprise by the historians. And I think last decade also saw another interesting development, the emergence of a new, more nuanced and nuanced side of memory studies, I would say, a more subjective dimension of memory studies, say in the work of Ananda Jahan Kabir, or most recently, the resounding demonstration of the power of material memory, of objects. How do you remember through objects, in the work of Anchal Malhotra? And I think all this somehow have, to some extent, set the stage for the public memorialization of a partition in the subcontinent. And I think it's a very critical moment in our history, in which in South Asia, we are seeing a public engagement with history. So this is one side. The other side is, the public conception of partition. So how much do people know about partition beyond the states that were partitioned? There is still that lacuna. I see what Alia was saying. You have to remember one thing. We have to go back to 1947 now. In 1947, the major difference between Punjab and Bengal was that there was genocidal violence in the Punjab. Bengal was quiet. Gandhiji was here actually partition violence started a year before partition in Calcutta, the Great Calcutta Killing, 16th August, Jinnah's, clarion call. And after that, what happened is, violence started in Calcutta, it moved to Noakhali in the east, and then moved westwards to UP and then Punjab in a horrific way in March. So partition violence started much before partition. But at the time of partition, Bengal was relatively quiet. It's not that migration did not happen. It's not that violence did not happen. But compared to the genocidal violence of partition in Punjab, it was nothing. And there was almost an equal exchange of population. So whenever you utter the word partition in the public imagination, there are certain images that come out, a lot of them by the American photographer Margaret Bourke-White. And they're all about Punjab. Those images of trains, packed trains, of tents, refugee things, of, stations being overfilled, violence, that has seared itself into the public consciousness. And for 7 decades, it has not come out. Also, visual memory. All the major films you can think about, say Garam Hawa in India, I'm talking for pan-Indian audience, or internationally speaking, say 1947 Earth. These are all about the Punjab side. I was researching in Bengal. Of course, we have had a great filmmaker, one of our gurus, Ritik Bhatto, who was obsessed about the theme of partition because he was a refugee himself and he ever accepted it. He did a trilogy on partition. So there have been filmmakers here as well. But the films that you think of also when you think of partition are from the Punjab. Talk of literature. When you think of partition literature, one of the first names that will come to your mind is Manto. Why do you think it is so? Not just because he was a great writer and he was writing at that time. Translations are available of Manto. The fact that I in Calcutta in the 1990s was reading a Manto or a Kuratulan Haidar or a Bhishma Sahani, partition has been written in 5 languages. The fact that we know so many Punjabi writers or writers from the Western side is because translations are there. Whereas how many Bengali novels or short stories do you know? I was doing my PhD on partition literature in English. And I had, I was studying a cross-section of novels from mid-50s to late 80s. And 5 out of the 6 novels that I was analyzing was from the Punjab. This is Indian writing English and Indian literature English. So what I'm trying to say is that there is 2 aspects to this. One is the public understanding, remembrance of partition. And the other is very specific organizational academic study of it. I think there is a gap here. On the one side, the bias has been mitigated or is being mitigated. And the other, it is still there. And KPM is working towards that. And ours is, of course, we are not just an archive, we are a museum. So what we have tried to do, since the time is already up, there is biases within Bengal partition research also. For example, whenever you say Bengal partition, you think of Bengal. But Bengal partition spilled over in other states. So one of the things that we are trying to do is we are focusing on the Northeast. Not much work has been done. Our supervising historian, Anandita Ghoshal, has done pioneering work on the subject. So we are actually focusing a lot on the Northeast because that is something that has not had that kind of a focus. And one of the things we are also trying to do is, I think this relates to another question, so I'll keep it for that probably, that the 3 main components that we have in our virtual museum, the events gallery, the virtual art gallery, and the oral history project, in all of these, we are trying to, we have tried to create content in a way that is accessible to the lay audience. And that is also one of the reasons, one of the ways in which we are trying to, make the Bengal partition available and accessible to others.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. And now that you've mentioned that there is a new fact that we as students get to know is that there was a spillover of refugees or partition survivors to the Northeast as well. And maybe someday we can talk about the Bengal aspect, especially with respect to the Northeast states in India and how partition and refugees rehabilitated there. So thank you very much for that point. And now we're going over to Dr. Begum from Liberation War Museum. And ma'am, we would like to know what the museum thinks about the East versus the West narrative, or if there at all exists an East versus West narrative, now that Rumela and Alia and Rituparna ji have talked about the fact that there isn't one, and that they're trying to mitigate it in their own ways. So Dr. Begum, your views on this?
Shantini, I would like Mr. Mufidul Haq to address this Punjab-Bengal partition narrative.
Sure. So Ruben, if you could please unmute Mr. Mufidul Haq.
Well, I think this is a very pertinent issue that has been raised. And we, at the Liberation War Museum, we are engaged in presenting the historical overview, and the partition become a very important part in this. And as Alia has been saying, that it is a rupture which has been created mostly by the external forces, but there were also support from within the society and community. So it is very important actually to study more deeply, and there are some meta-narrative that has emerged with the partition violence. And I think it is very important, and what Pritipurna has also been explaining, that Bengal experience is a bit different. And what is different has been expressed after 24 years in the emergence of Bangladesh. Emergence of Bangladesh is not that just the dismemberment of Pakistan. It is the emergence of a nation state with a very different ideology, and which negates the partition ideology of division on the religious line. So, and I think the trends are already there during the very conflicting scenario. As you have been heard that in 1946, there was the great Calcutta killing, then followed by the riot in the villages of Noakhali. And that disturbed Mahatma Gandhi very much, because the riots were happening previously in the urban centers where the conflicting parties do not know each other and they easily resort to violence. But in the village, you were living together for hundreds of years. Then you became very violent against the otherness of other people. And so he decided that he will come to Noakhali and walk through the villages. He stayed there for more than 3 months, and his walk through the village is a great story. But it is already, it remained mostly unaddressed and unheard. The image of Gandhi, which is the iconic image, is he's walking with a long stick in his hand. And that image comes not from the Salt March, but from the Noakhali March. But people actually link it with the Salt March. But I will just say that even in those days when the major parties were in collusion with the colonial rulers, they get engaged in dividing the two composite identity in two provinces, in Punjab and in Bengal. And at that time, during the great Calcutta killing also, young activist, student activist, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was in Calcutta. And his memoirs has recently been published after so many years. He has written in the prison in 1967, but it was got lost. Then it was found in 2010, it got published. And it shows very clearly that he was an activist of the Muslim student wing, but he was for communal harmony. And that is very important. And even on 15th August and 16th August, he not only protected the Muslim community, but also saved the Hindu community from the Muslim area and took them to the safe place in the most Hindu-dominated part of Calcutta. And also the Sarwardi's role at that time has been depicted in many, many ways, but he was strongly a supporter of communal harmony. And in Calcutta, the administration collapsed for 6-7 days, and there was great carnage. And you cannot blame one particular person on that. And in recent historical narratives, more detail is coming. And I would like to refer to one book by Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, The Interregnum. And he said that the last word on Sarwardi, one cannot say now. We need to look more deeply into it. But what is important that Noakhali March is very important, that you not only look into the ruptures, you should also look into the attempts to go beyond this rupture, to mend the rupture and to create a harmonious society. And also riot followed in Bihar. And then most of the leaders, they have opted for partition. But even at that time, Sarwardi, along with Sharad Bose, the brother of Subhash Bose, they actually floated a new concept that you can divide Punjab, but Bengal should remain united. And they have made a formulation of how United Bengal will perform, where there are elements of affirmative action for the minority. And I think that concept later came up in South Africa when you are trying to move beyond the conflicting society. And so when partition came in 1947, Gandhi decided he will stay in Bengal, in Calcutta. And he went on fasting for communal harmony. And we have one photograph in our museum, which we think is very important, that Gandhi is fasting at a Muslim house at Beliaghata, which was ransacked by the rioters earlier. And he was sitting on the floor, and along with him, with his close comrades, there is Hossein Sheikh Sarwardi. And in that photo, it is also been shown that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, a tall, young, lanky fellow, he is standing on the door. So he was, when the Bengal was partitioned, when Pakistan was created, he was neither for the this side or that side. And then when Pakistan emerged, the conflict also emerged on the issue of national identity. And you know the story, 1952 struggle and culmination in 1971. And so we need to study these things more deeply. But tragedy happened in Bengal in 1950, when riots broke out in both sides of the border and the mass exodus started. And what the major leaders have tried to do this time, they had the experience of Punjab. And there was a demand from Bengal that we should also opt for exchange of population, which was adopted as a formal policy in Punjab. But Bengal resisted that. But it could not resist the flow of the refugees and also the violence. So it is a tragedy that occurred in Bengal in 1950. Then,
thank you, sir. Sorry, sir, I will have to cut you here.
Yeah.
So sorry for that, because one thing that is, I think, come out of this panel question is that all sides have suffered, be it Punjab, be it Sindh, be it the princely states, Bengal, and later in 71, Bangladesh, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. So the one thing that has come out is that with all the people suffering, there was also this message of harmony that had prevailed in the subcontinent. And I think that is essential. So, and that is why I think one thing that can only come out with intense research and archiving that these projects have been doing. So now that I'll be going to the next question, and it's on a similar line on the question that just asked, is that what is the one myth that your work as an archivist, as a historian or a scholar of partition has been mitigated by the work that you've been doing? So what has your experience taught us? Which one myth has been demythified in your experience as an archivist? So I'll be starting with Alia. Alia, if you could please answer this question.
So I remember when I started my journey with partition, I came from a family who had not experienced partition because I was already situated in the country that I grew up in. My ancestors had been there since forever. And so when I grew up, I always thought that partition itself was a myth, and there was nothing much to it. And it's only when I started engaging with personal stories that I understood loss, I understood trauma, I understood displacement. And I think beyond and above everything else, I understood humanizing of statistics. So it was no longer 3.1 million people crossing the borders. It was no longer 1.6 million people lost. It was no longer the largest mass migration in human history, or these numbers, these strange humans that didn't exist, that these things had happened to. These were people like myself, who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, forced by circumstances oftentimes to make choices which they might not have wanted to make, to be forced into making choices that they over time told themselves that they had always wanted. So the realization that circumstances and popular narratives are talking about high politics with very little respect to humanity and human needs and human suffering. So for me, engaging with oral histories and creating archival content the biggest myth that I broke was this happened to the otherization. So like history has a very strange way of otherizing. And it is with human histories that and collections of stories and using the art of storytelling that one can often go much deeper into understanding social consciousness, human values. And I remember like one story, I was sitting across from someone and they turned around and told me, okay, at the end of the day, you all want a future. You want a roof over your head, you want food in your belly, and you want some sort of hope for your coming generations. That is all there is. And wherever there is that hope or that gleam of a possibility of a better future, you tend to walk towards it. And in reflection, oftentimes whitewash a lot of things that you had experienced for the larger good. Human beings. So that was the biggest eye-opener.
Thank you, Alia, and thank you for giving us such excellent terms of humanizing the statistics that one gets and the concept of otherizing. And if time permits, maybe we could get into it again. But now I'll be going to Rumela. And Rumela, now that the 1947 Partition Archive is also working with the diaspora, so how has your experience been, or what is the one myth that, especially if I could maybe twist the question a bit when it comes to the 1947 Partition Archive, one myth, especially in context to the diaspora's experience, and how, which is that one myth that has been demythified in your experience as an oral historian and at the museum?
Question, Chandni. So, as I worked as an oral historian for the Partition Archive, there have been several myths that I've written down while I was collecting the stories. So, if I talk about one that has really hit me hard, is that when I was collecting, like, we have this general conception that all of India was under British rule. But we have to understand the fact that 1/3 of India was never under formal British rule, but India comprised more than 550 princely states. And these states were culturally very different from each other. So the British government had different constitutional and diplomatic arrangements with the states, all of which required legal negotiation when the British ceded the power. So when we talk about post-colonization. So Kashmir is one such example. On the western coastal areas of Goa, Daman, and Diu, we know that they were under the Portuguese control until 1961. And then in South India, when we talk specifically about Pondicherry, we know that it has been a French colony and has been ruled by the French till 1954. So look at the dates over here. We are talking about 1947 when Britishers left India after 200 years of rule, and we have got our independence. But we also have to understand that what was the experiences of the people who was living under the rule of the French or the Portuguese, and how are their experiences different from those who have been liberated from the British regime. So this is something when I have recorded the stories or when I have got involved with the archive, I have understood that each experience is very different and unique. First of all, that is the one thing that a common myth like we have, that maybe all partition experiences are similar, which is absolutely not the case, because a person or a state that was under the British rule will have a completely different experience post-partition compared to someone or some states that was still under control of some Portuguese or the French powers. So that is something that I have come across while I have delved deeper into the stories in the archive, and that has kind of helped me understand the context of South Asia, specifically India post-partition and post-independence also.
Thank you, Rumela. And a very important point that you've just shared with us, and that is that not the entire United India was under the British rule at that point of time. Like you said, we had the princely states under the British rule or suzerainty, so to speak. And then you had some states which were not under British rule at all, like you mentioned, Goa in the south of India, present-day India, or Puducherry again on the eastern coast of India, down south, not under British rule, but under the French. So, thank you very much for sharing that, an important aspect. So I'll be going now to Dr. Roy. Same question, Dr. Roy. what has your experience taught you or helped, one myth that it has busted?
I don't know about myth, but I can talk about a misconception. It's the same, that the current generation has no interest in history. It's not true. They have an interest. You have to make it interesting for them. The responsibility lies with us. I'll give you some examples. So the first major physical event we had in 2019 at Raghunath Bhavan Museum Resource Center, Kolkata, was a 4-day. It was a very unique film fest. It was a 4-day fest which included features and documentaries from both sides of the border. We had 13 screenings in all over 4 days, and it ended with a master class by one of our 2 chief guests from Bangladesh, Tanvir Mukammal. The other one was Akram Khan. So Tanvir sir did a masterclass at the end, and you won't believe the turnout for that was more than any other screening, and a major portion of that audience were students, and not just film study students, students from various disciplines. Last year, we had a 12-day art exhibition at Kolkata Center for Creativity, Legacy of Laws, Perspectives from Partition of Bengal, in which it was a group show. You know, the 5 contemporary artists and their take on partition, which in itself actually busted a smaller myth that there is not much partition art from Bengal. It's while working that I came to know that there's so much going on. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the other myth now. So there also, all through the 12 days, the footfall included not just senior citizens and teachers and middle-aged people who had grown up with hearing stories of partition, but a lot of the young, just a year into our existence, the pandemic happened, right? So we were forced into the digital mode like most other organizations, and we organized a number of online events. There also I have seen the young engaged in great numbers. Talking of my experience as a teacher and scholar, I am frequently invited to speak, and in the last couple of years, it has been mostly on KPM, but I'm also invited to speak on partition literature because my personal work has been on partition literature. And everywhere I've gone, believe me, it's a wide array of institutions that I've spoken in, mostly to undergrad, postgrad students, but from various disciplines. I've only encountered curiosity, interest. I've been asked very probing questions. So I have a 10-year-old daughter. Since she was 4 or 5 years old, I've been doing this. So she's growing up with a lot of partition, having to hear a lot of partition. The kind of interest I see in her, obviously because of the exposure she's having because of me. So I think it is absolutely wrong to say that this generation has no interest. It has, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, and I think I should thank you on behalf of all of us at MBC for in a way demythifying this misconception that students are not interested. We're pretty much interested in history, and like you said, it just needs to be made interesting. And now that reminds me that MBC, we most of us are students. Some are PhD candidates, some are master students, undergraduate students, and even in the subcontinent, you have excellent organizations working towards it. There is Karma in India, entirely student-based. We have Purana Pakistan, there is Bangladesh Stories. So thank you so much for that. Sorry, ma'am, you're not.
Yeah, I just wanted to add more. I actually wanted to say this. See, you are all students.
Thank you.
And just wanted to add 2 more points about our organization. Throughout we have involved a lot of the young. So in 2020, we ran a public history post, guest blog post on our website, which a whole team of interns did who had done a workshop with us. The VKPM team, it's a multidisciplinary team of 14 people who has been working for a year. So it includes experts like historian, filmmaker, artist, scenographer, architects, but half the team are research scholars. So, in our experience, in our work also, we have involved the young a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for that. Again, Mr. Hook, if you could share the one misconception / myth that your work has helped you overcome or demythify, sir.
Yeah, one aspect of our work is to study the 1971 genocide, which was one of the most brutal genocide in the post-Second World scenario, and about 3 million people perished in the black hole of genocide. And this genocide was committed by the Pakistan army, which was mostly composed of Punjabi officials. And so when we looked deeper into it, we found that they were actually victims of brutal attack in 1947. And then this dehumanization process is very important, that the politics and the outside forces have dehumanized the military, and they started this genocidal killing, which is, we also say, the killing of one of the largest killing of Muslims by the Muslims. And when we look deeper into it, I found a very interesting character, Major General M.O. Mitta. He was a resident of Mumbai, Indian Muslim from a very aristocratic family, and he migrated for Pakistan. And he married a Brahmo girl, Hindu, from another very accomplished family, a dancer. And so in Pakistan, he was in 1964, he was accused of being a spy of India. And he tried to prove himself more Pakistani than the other Pakistanis. So there are many, I think, things which are actually related with the partition violence, and which actually also caused the dehumanization of the community on the basis of, no respect for diversity. And I think Pakistan has also to study deeply into this, that how 1947 partition violence is also linked with the 1971 Bangladesh violence. And also there are many stories also when the community leaders in Pakistan, they condemned the violence, like poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz and also many others. We have contact with the civil society group in Pakistan who have raised their voice and who have came up with a strong demand that Pakistan owe an apology to Bangladesh. So I think to move beyond the violence, we need to have a deeper understanding of history and create a kind of bridge among the community. And I think that's very important. And Bangladesh emerged as a secular country, so we also have many problems, but I think the historical lessons need to be learned, and we should be very much part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Hoke. And the point that you raised, that pain giving rise to more pain, I think that is important for all of us to understand now that we're looking at partition in hindsight, and the question of apology. And I think now that 75 years later, and even now that one reads more and more and interacts with organizations like yourself, I think one needs to realize that we cannot ask anybody to apologize to us, but the only thing that we can do is learn from our experience and try to sensitize people about the sufferings and the learnings that each of these events has taught us. I think history is all about experience. And thank you very much for all the answers, right from Dr. Roy saying that students are interested in history, to Mr. Hoke saying that pain giving rise to pain, to Ms. Taibi saying that one needs to start humanizing the statistics, and to Ms. Ganguly saying that one needs to understand that India was not just under British rule, there were several other case studies. And I think these are excellent myths that we have, I think, taken a point of convenience here using your years and years of experience. I've just asked you to sum up the years of experience that you've had and share your myths with us. So now that I think it will help us as students and researchers in Indian history and continent history rise beyond these myths and overcome these myths and be better research analysts. So thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And now I'll be going to the last panel question for this session. And this is a very contemporary sort of a question, and that is that how does subcontinent's shared culture figure in the transnational identity today? And there is more to it. For example, does a mutual passion for cricket, for example, now that we have the T20 World Cup even coming closer to every day, so does that play a significant role in how Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis identify themselves today? So again, I'll repeat the question: how does the subcontinent's shared culture figure in the transnational identity today? Does a mutual passion for cricket or for food or for dance or movies play a significant role in how this generation of Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis identify themselves? So if you could share that with us. I'll go with Ms. Ganguly. Rumela.
Yeah, once again, thank you for that question, Chandni. So this is a question that probably the archive specifically has nothing to do with this, but in my personal opinion, I believe yes, the shared cultural aspect does shape our transnational identity to a great extent. So it is not only cricket that we are talking about, but the films, the music, literature, and other medium of popular culture that focuses specifically on social and cultural linkages, and that have largely influenced the involvement and
Thank you, Rumela. I'll be asking the same question to Alia. And Alia, how does the subcontinent's shared culture figure in our identity today? Please, you're unmuted. Muted.
So one of the things that I, as an individual, and this I guess is a reflective question, so I can only answer for myself. One of the things that I have experienced as a South Asian is that we all have an identity crisis. And it stems from the basic fact that it's very difficult to figure out where we want to start our history from, because we all are distorting it. We don't feel comfortable starting from the beginning or the middle, and we're all picking and choosing elements of history that resonate with our particular moment in time to what we want to claim ourselves to be. The idea of decolonizing and packing what colonization means also is one of those problems which we are refusing to accept. So I remember I was having a conversation with the South Asian Institute at the Harvard University, and we were on a panel. And one of the things that we were discussing was the trauma of 1947. And I remember one thing that I quoted over there, and I will quote that again over here, is we are still 75 years down the line discussing 47 like it was yesterday. Is simply because we have never acknowledged it as a wound that needs to heal. Because to acknowledge it would also mean to take responsibility for causing the wound, for letting the wound become gangrene and refusing to ever address that it needs to be addressed, to heal. For healing, you need to acknowledge the problem. We have been running from our history. We have been running from our identity, and hence we find ourselves in a strange flux. I personally feel that for us, our identity is formed by our collective history, by our collective identities, by the different structural ruptures, changes, political, social, religious, that have taken place in this land. Accept them as part of a collective past. Take what makes sense. Let go of things which are weighing us down, do not have any place in our modern today. Learn from history. And the idea of archival collections is learning. The idea of academics, of education is learning. So if you're not doing that, then we are doing something amiss. And history is one of the most beautiful ways of understanding ourselves. So for me, it is all about a collective history.
Thank you, Alia, and your point about this distorted or confused identity that we as South Asians have is, I think, something that this generation of South Asians, and I think people in general, need to come to terms with and start looking at it. Thank you for that. Mr. Hook, the same question. How has our shared culture figured in our transnational identity today? Does cricket or movies or food or folk music play any role in how this generation of Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis identify themselves?
I think if you want to say one basic element, I will say that it is Sufi music. And I think that's one element actually which unites us very strongly. And just 2 weeks ago, there was a book published in Bengali in Dhaka. It is about Shahanshah Qawwali, Nusrat. And I think Nusrat Fateh Ali goes beyond the borders, beyond the ruptures. And also we are proud that one of our great poets, Shamsur Rahman, he translated Bhitai Sufi songs in Pakistani days. And I think also we have Sufi Music Festival where also performer from Pakistan comes. And also we found it's the same way that our bowls are also singing the same way. And also the shrines of the bowls have been attacked by the religious fundamentalist forces. So we are actually became a victim of religious division. And to move beyond it, I think culture is a very strong element, and subcontinental culture which define ourselves. We carry multiple identity. We are proud of our Bengali national identity, but at the same time, We belong to the Indian culture, to the subcontinental culture. We have relationship with South Asia, Southeast Asia, and a global citizen. So I think we should look into the threads of commonality and move beyond the division and ruptures. And music, and Sufi music especially, is a great asset for all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. A very interesting point of you of this shared love for Sufi music, and something that I think goes on to become a rage every day. It's not something which is of the past now. This generation of, like you said, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladesh are even more in love with Sufi music than ever. So thank you very much for that. Age, I think, has nothing to do with one's love for Sufi music or one's nationality even with Sufi music. Thank you. And Dr. Roy, the same question. How has our shared culture figured in our identity today?
I was just thinking of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan when you asked that question anyway. I want to bust a myth here before answering a question. So the question is really about transnational identity as it manifests itself in popular culture, right? And modern examples of that. Whenever we think of transnational identity, we think in terms of culture, and rightly so. But I want to bring in, before talking about giving my take on this, and I have a little more nuanced take on this, and I hope I'll be given the time to say it. I want to talk about another aspect which is never thought about, which is ecology. If you're talking of transnational identity, it manifests itself, in something as ecology as well. And I'll tell you, one of the main things I have in mind, it has been on my mind, especially for the last 2 years, is that, and the example I'm going to give is of Bengal actually. So West Bengal and Bangladesh, the erstwhile Bengal, undivided Bengal, ecologically we are one unit. We are both part of the Bengal Delta. We are a deltaic people. And our cultural commonality actually stems from there. The food we eat, kind of whether we have the kind of houses we live in, the kind of dress we wear, all stems from that, but we never talk about it. We don't research it much, So for example, certain elements of it, the Bengal Delta is very prone to cyclone, for example, to tropical cyclones. When a cyclone strikes, when an Amphan or an Alia strikes, it doesn't pay any heed to the border. It doesn't remember the border. I have very vivid memories of Cyclone Amphan right in the middle of COVID 2020, May 2020, and it was devastating for both Bangladesh and West Bengal, also the Indian state of Orissa. So, that is one thing I would, this is something I would like to draw your attention to, that if you're talking of transnational identity, the culture stems from geography. We should never forget that. Coming to popular culture, I think films and music has been a big pond, but I think films, music, in other words, the visual and performative arts, if I can say it more broadly, but I think it plays out a little differently in different permutations, combinations. In some, India, Pakistan is a little closer. In some others, India, Bangladesh is a little closer. For example, Bollywood has had a much greater draw in Pakistan than it ever did in Bangladesh. And you have Pakistani singers and actors, say Atif Aslam or Mahira Khan or Fawad Khan coming over here to work in this industry. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, is a huge example of one, pan-South Asian musical phenomena, I would say. And Mofidul Bhai is so right in saying that Sufi is one thing that connects us. I think on the Bengal side, I think the two major genres would be folk music. Baul Song is of course part of it, and it's not a homogeneous thing. It's a very diverse field, and Robindranath Sangeet as well. There were many prolific singers, composers of the early 20th century, whose songs are taught, learned, cherished on both sides. Rabindranath Sangeet, the songs that were written and composed by the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore is preeminent among them, but there's been others as well, like Nazrul Islam, whose body of work is called Nazrul Giti. So that is a very cherished tradition. One of the most beautiful articulations of transnational identity through music that I have come across is in the work of the singer Moshumi Bhomik, who hails from West Bengal. If you can, please go and visit her website, The Traveling Archive. So what is archived there? It is an archive of field recordings of songs, stories and sounds from Bengal. And she says she very beautifully says that Bengal is just not a geographical space, it is also a space of the mind and imagination. And the Bengal here is an extended Bengal. It's just not Bengal and West Bengal and Bangladesh. It is parts of Assam. It is the diaspora, Bengali and Bangladeshi neighborhoods in the diaspora. It is migrant workers' quarters in Gurgaon. So, transnational identity through music, through sound. I think this is one of the most beautiful articulations that I have come across. Films, films work out a little differently here. So one of our gurus, as I was saying, Ritik Ghotto, Bangladeshi filmmakers have been greatly influenced by them. And there's a lot of collaboration going on all the time, including, cross-border romances among celebrities. And in fact, I would just like to mention one filmmaker. Now there are many, but one of our living greats, Gautam Ghosh, not just in Bengali, but Indian director. He has been working for more than 4 decades, and in his work, Indo-Bangladesh collaborations has happened for a very long time. I just want to give you one early example, Podda Nodir Machi, boatman of the river Podda, which was way back in 1993. Shongpuchi in 2016, which is very recent. So in all these areas, I think, the transnational identity manifests itself very strongly.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. And the one thing that I think that has come up common in this panel question is the mutual love for Sufi music, whilst movies or folk music, like in one of my conversations with Dr. Roy, she told me that there's this mutual love for Bengali folk music in Bangladesh and West Bengal, but that is something which is limited to Bengal and Bangladesh. And like you said, that there is this thing of Pakistan and India having this mutual love for Indian movies or Pakistani actors. And again, that is something which is related to India and Pakistan. But the one thing that goes beyond India, Pakistan, Bangladesh is this love for Sufi music. So that's a good point. And I think we enjoy it now more than ever. So thank you very much for that. And that brings us to the end of the panel questions. We have a couple of questions from the audience. So I'll be going ahead and I'll be sharing those with you. All right. So this question, thank you so much for the fascinating lecture and the great work that you're doing. I think it is, this is for the 1947 Partition Archive, I believe. I think it is also great that you're capturing and presenting these more personal histories and stories. I wanted to ask you about your feelings and thoughts on the records and archives that are displaced, that is the Indian Office in the British Library at Collections in the UK National Archives. I'm really interested on your thoughts of these displaced archives, especially from your own. So we'll begin with Rumela, you talking about it, and then we'll go to Alia.
Jackie, can you please repeat the second part of the question? I got the first part.
Okay, I'll repeat the question again. They want to know what is your take on this concept of, or this fact that we've lost archives today, displaced archives like the Indian Office in the British Library and the collections in the UK National Archives. Now that they're lost to us, what is the impact that it has had on our understanding of 1947 and 71?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question to talk about and to address. So building an archive, since I am involved with this work for the last 6-7 years, it takes a lot of work. So it is not only one person that is working to, create the archive and present it to the audience the way it is. So it actually takes a village to do the entire work. And the next important thing that we have to take care of is that it is maintained and it goes out in the public display in a proper light. So we shouldn't be putting out something that might, kind of create a controversy or a misunderstanding of the topic that we're talking about. So, of course, when archives when we lose archives, important archives that you talked about, it's of course a very unfortunate event, because it actually reduces the chance of, like, as I was talking, the main purpose of archive is to ignite research, to go back to the documents, to see what I'm otherwise unable to see, otherwise I'm unable to access to. So of course, if we lose access to this kind of archives, it's really unfortunate. It's a loss on our part, and I think that is something that the archives will also have to take care of. So when we are working at the Partition Archive, we always have this at the back of our mind that at each step we have to, kind of modify ourselves. We have to reinvent ourselves so that we do not go out of place, or, we always have to keep this in mind that whatever I am doing, the archive I am building, it is something that people will have, will come and look 100 years or 200 years from now. So we have to be very, very sure by all the things that we're doing, and we're doing it correctly. And of course, if so much of data, if so much of hard work goes into waste, or if it goes into a loss, that's really, really unfortunate thing. And I hope that we can, as archives, we can be very careful and sure about how we are archiving things and preserving it in that way.
Thank you, Rumela. Alia, the same question. What impact has it had that now that we've lost a few archives on our collective history in general?
So the thing is, like, the way we look at it, every time an elderly dies, we lose a very important part of our history if that elderly has not had their history recorded. So we do lose, but at the same time, there are so many people who are trying to gather as much as we can. And no project or no archive in the world can lay claim to having access to each and every story, but a large chunk of our history is immortalized through different archival collections across the world. The idea is to just ensure that we try and diversify our knowledge base as much as we can. And oftentimes having our information stored at multiple spaces acts as a fantastic tool for creating some sort of accountability for not having a state narrative shoved down on us. Whenever archives today work, like whether it be us or the 1947 archives or the Dastan project and many others like them, are always looking at longevity as a byproduct of their archival collection, which means that they all are cohesively looking at data to not just be available for the immediate future, but for the long-term future. What is lost cannot be retrieved, but there are many different ways in which that information can be reached at. So what is lost is not actually completely lost. So I'm going to come back to that. But yes, being very mindful of what needs to be stored today is much more important than sitting and crying over what hasn't been done.
That's a very practical suggestion. Thank you so much, Alia, of storing our records in multiple spaces. And I think it's a note for all future organizations as well as the current to ensure that there is that they have multiple copies saved somewhere so that posterity does not face the same problem as we are right now. So thank you. Dr. Roy, the same question for you from the audience, and that is, how has the fact that we've lost archives today impacted the work that your organization is doing?
See, since it is a virtual museum, how should I put it? See, it's actually not live yet. We hope to share the link later in the year. We just had a launch event here in August. See, we have three main components: event gallery, virtual art gallery, and the oral history project. How the advantage of a virtual museum is that it is always there in virtual space. So for as long, you just need an internet connection to have access to that material. But the thing is, whatever the point that Alia made, that we need to store in multiple spaces, is something that we have also discussed. While we have been working on this, we understand the importance of archives, but whatever we are doing is archival, of course. So it is a museum. Obviously, all this thing is being collected and stored in one place. So whatever is up there, but there is a question about maintenance. You maintain the site, you maintain, and we just faced it just this year. We had a Facebook page that has been running since February 2019, and it was hacked. 3.5 years of content gone. It is not gone because most of it is saved somewhere. But what I'm trying to say is that, now we cannot replicate 3.5 years of content in the exact same way. We will try, we have decided we'll try to do some throwbacks. So most of our posts has been around events. We are trying to think about ways of being able to put that information again back. So this experience is really, you're talking about lost archives, our own little archive on Facebook of all the things that we've done. What is lost is real-time comments, etc. But it was a very, how should I put it? It was a big learning experience in June about how careful we need to be about our resources. And we thought we had all kinds of security in place. And it turns out that we actually, in spite of that, this happened. So we are working in virtual space that has what is the advantage is also the disadvantage. Advantage is that, of course, it is out there. The maintenance of a virtual archive is relatively easier than a physical one. But the negative aspect of that is also that, this cybercrime is a real issue. Cyber security is a real issue. So we really need to be very careful about it. And this is something we've discussed a lot among ourselves, how to best preserve what we are doing. So as Alia said, the answer is, the most practical answer to that is, of course, having multiple places to save and store. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. And Mr. Hook, very quickly, we've got a couple of questions. So very quickly, sir, if you could give us your insights into how has the fact that we've lost archives today impacted the work that the museum has been doing?
Well, for us, it is a different scenario because in the colonial time, East Bengal, we do not have any archive. The archive National Archive was in Calcutta. And after 1947, we also did not have any archive because the archive was established in Karachi and then moved to Islamabad. So only after 1971, our National Archive has been established. And our museum came into existence after 25 years. We are not a compulsory depository. We are a people's museum. But we found that people actually collect so many things that it is surprising. When the museum has opened, people came up with a lot of documents and artifacts, and especially paper documents. And we now have quite a large archive contributed by the people. And we also have an oral history program where we encourage the younger generation people to interview the senior members about the 1971 experience. And we have more than 60,000 eyewitness accounts collected by the students given to our museum. It is also, we say, the cost-free exercise for us. And also we have been contributed many documents from abroad, from those who were part of the Bangladesh struggle, both national and international figures. So we found that archiving is an ongoing process, and you never say that, well, everything is lost. It is your way that how you try to retrieve it. But I think the National Archive or the Central Archive, whether in UK, in the India House or other places, I mean SOAS or the British Library or any other places, if it is lost, it is a loss for the whole civilization. So we should try to protect that, but at the same time, we should continue collecting evidence, collecting documents, and preparing the new historical narrative as an archival resource. So it is an ongoing process for us. And one thing I will just add, that we got access to the Indian archives, we got access to the archive in the United States, but our researchers have sometimes got access to the Pakistani archives. But I think this collaboration which we are talking about, we can also share each other's archives freely. And I think that will also create a common resource for all of us.
Thank you, sir. And thank you so much for considering our initiative worthy enough that it helps great organizations like yours come together and enrich the archives that all of you already possess. So thank you very much for those words. And with kind words, there are several kind praises of kind words of praises that have been coming in for our panelists. So there's somebody who says that it's an absolutely engaging discussion. As a teacher and scholar of literature, I've always found that history and literature are totally inseparable, and how we need to continuously revisit our understanding of history. The session today has indeed enriched my understanding of partition. Thank you and many congratulations. Thank you very much for your kind words. And we have one last question from Ritu, and she says that this is for all the panelists. Based on your experience of global experience of interviewing refugee survivors or witnesses, how is 1947 partition looked at in current times by the rest of the world? So how is the subcontinent's experience viewed by the rest of the world, 1947? We'll begin with Alia. Unmute, please.
So ironically, for whatever reason, we have been very exoticized, and that means that our partition has also been very exoticized. And by exoticized, I do not mean in a very good, positive way. We are looked at as those uncivilized individuals who keep bickering and fighting all the time, and have no way of forming sustainable peace. Our stories, our individual stories of loss and despair have been whitewashed by the colonial mindset of not looking at ruling the region, creating so many chaotic differences, and just blaming it on the behavior of a people who have been for a long amount of time been behaving in a certain way. And I guess the onus for me as an individual today of if I want to take ownership of South Asia today, lies with me to educate them about what our history or a collective past is all about. So I would honestly say that times are changing. Oral histories are actually one of the most important ways that we have been able to break this myth of a very exoticized and very whitewashed historical narrative of the partitions and many other traumas that South Asia as a whole has had to undergo over the past few centuries. So yeah, I think a lot of stories written by us about us need to be out there for us to have a more realistic outlook. Because I remember reading somewhere, as long as someone else is writing your story, they will be writing it from their lens. So unless we start writing our own stories, we will be, for a very large amount of time, be pushed into a corner to try and fit ourselves into a mold that someone else is shaping for us.
Thank you, Alia, for that. And now I'll be going to Rumela, your views on how 1947 is looked at by the rest of the world in current times.
So first of all, thank you to the attendee who has asked this question. I think this is a very important question to address. The fact that today we are having this event where we are coming from so many organizations, and so all of us are doing work on partition and we are talking about it. So this is, I believe, a milestone in its own way. So 10 years, 15 years back, this awareness was not there, absolutely not there. So when we started our work in 2008, nobody was systematically documenting partition. Yes, people were collecting oral histories, people were doing their own research, but there was no systematic documentation, which was very much necessary to understand or to counteract the silence that there has been for so many years, for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. So first of all, I think that we have been able to come out of that time space where nobody used to talk about partition. So if we talk about our history books, so at least when I was studying history in my school, 15th August 1947 was all about independence. So India got independence from 200 years rule, and there was probably just one sentence that talked about that the country was also partitioned on religious lines. If you go back today, we see that we have grown from this space. So there is a lot of, not only in educational sectors, like there are universities, there are schools and colleges that are including partition studies in their curriculum. So I myself have had the chance to read partition literature when I was studying my post-graduation in Calcutta. So I am pretty sure that there are many other educational institutions that are working on this specific topic, that is they're including it in their curriculum. So that is a great achievement in its own way, because in education, if we are incorporating it in literature or in social science, it's very important that we learn about it through the different materials that we have available. That is one place that in the education sector we are talking about partition. If we talk about popular culture, you see there are so many organizations now that have come together to work on this topic. There is so many documentaries. If we talk about the BBC documentary that was made in 2015. So all this has its root back to when we started in 2008 or 2010. So of course we have come a long way. So if we specifically look into the funding, if we talk about our own organization, so when our founders started the work in 2008, 2010, it was so difficult to get the funding because people was really not interested to hear stories of partition or to fund a project like this. But it has kind of been more easier compared to 2008, 2010 now, because there has been a general awareness. We are talking about it. We are making films about it. We are writing books about it. We are writing fiction, we are writing literature about it. So that is a great achievement in its place, that we are talking about partition, that people have been able to come out of the silence and to talk about their own experiences. They're feeling confident to share their memories with us, their personal memories in the form of oral histories with the different organizations that are working on this specific topic. So I believe that there has been a lot of improvement, but still there is a lot of place that we need to go. There is a lot of more awareness probably we need to create, but compared to the last decade, I definitely feel that there has been an improvement, and that is a very positive sign that we are talking about partition these days.
Thank you, Rumela. Same question, Dr. Roy, and this would be the last question that we're taking, ladies and gentlemen. And after that, we have a special request, so we'll be taking that. So, Dr. Roy, your thoughts on how 1947 is viewed by the rest of the world?
To be very honest, I don't think I'm qualified to talk about the world, the whole world. Once again, I will make the same distinction that I've done for the Punjab bias. Within the, if you're talking about the partitioned countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, their diaspora, and also academic studies. For example, the US and all across Europe, there are specific South Asia programs. US has nothing to do with partition, but there are specific South Asia programs. A lot of best of Indian academics go to the US. Okay, so the partition, the erstwhile partition, the partitioned countries in academia where it is studied as a discipline, within South Asia, certain organizations, and of course, where there is a colonial link. For example, Embassy, the very fact that Embassy reached out to us. You know, you are a very, very young organization, like 2018, right? And you're trying to correct the narrative of colonialism. So where there is a certain colonial connect with the British, there is certain awareness. But I think beyond this, I'm not sure whether people of the world know about partition. Even partitioned countries don't know much about each other. For example, till now, I've been dealing with it for the last 15, 20 years. I have found so very little, if at all, comparative studies of partition. How many of us know about other partitioned countries? Partitions are very different from each other. So the thing is, comparative studies of partition within partitioned countries don't exist. Forget the world. So the virtual museum is also a response to this. The motivation was this, that we had a lot of discussion about this, that we knew why we were doing it, but the question was for whom. So the thing is, we are trying to create content that will be accessible as a free, obviously, free to access, but also accessible in terms of content to the uninitiated audience who know nothing about India. The other day I was having a conversation with Chandini, and you said that very few actually in the audience will know about Bangladesh, about, the actual, that South Asia is 3 different countries and we have to keep it very basic. So that is the state of the world, I think, in general. So our effort has been that those who know about the subject will hopefully appreciate what we are doing. And we also find something of value in it. But more importantly, those who know nothing about partition, even they will be able to understand or gain some knowledge from it. So my answer is that we are trying to reach out to the world, because I'm not sure the world knows much about us.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Mr. Hook, your views on the fact that how is 1947 viewed by the rest of the world in today's times?
Well, I think it is more important than how the world view us is how we actually confronting the legacy of partition. I think that's the way it will determine that how the world look into the reality of 1947, 47 and beyond. And I think we actually could not move much beyond the partition. And if we look into the relationship, the state leadership, the political leadership, it is a very unfortunate reality. The India-Pakistan relation, is at the lowest ebb, and also the hype that is being made within the society by different forces who are actually promoting the division, promoting the partition. And what is also important for us is we are studying the who did about the violence. I mean, what happened in 1947, who did it? But I think more important is that why it happened. Now is the time actually to say that why it happened. And that study actually will take us beyond the conflicting scenario and also the learning from that historical lesson. And so I think the subcontinent, the states, the political leadership has a lot to do, but we cannot influence much. What we can do is the people-to-people solidarity, connectivity, and also the more exchange, more sharing. And the dream is that one day subcontinent will become like the European Union. The borders will be there as a state boundary, but the relationship goes beyond the boundaries. The boundaries became faded when the economic, social, cultural, or people's contact come up. And so I think the subcontinent has a long way to go, but it is very important that we confront the legacy of partition and try to mend the ruptures. The ruptures that Alia said at the beginning is, I think, very important. There are so many ruptures, and let us all work with all our strength and hope that we will move beyond the partition. And that's the main challenge.
Thank you, sir. I think that is an excellent point for us to wrap up our Q&A session is that now is the time that the subcontinent takes the reins and we decide how we want our stories to be told rather than that happening the other way around. Thank you so much. And we have several well wishes pouring in for all our panelists. And there's somebody, some Arpit, who says that for someone like me with no background in history, this is a very insightful and interesting session. We have Dr. Mini Gerewal, and she says a very informative session. Was very interesting to hear the different perspectives of the partition narrative. Congratulations to the organizers and the distinguished speakers. Thank you, Dr. Gerewal. And with this, we come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank the panelists, Alia, Rumela, Dr. Roy, Mr. Hoke, Dr. Begum for joining in, our founder, Chow, for giving us the permission to go ahead with this, the wonderful team that we have at MBC, Andrea Potts, Hannah McLean, Ruben Duffy, Sohail Omar, Freya Samuels, thank you very much. And now this marks the end of the formal session, but we have a very special request from one of the audience members, and they say that his grandfather is somebody who has witnessed 1947 partition and would like to share a few words with us. Sef, sir, if you could please unmute, and we would like to talk to them.
Say hello. Sorry, technical glitch. Hello, my name is Abdul Ghafoor. I was born in 1932 in a village called Adawar, which is in district Punjab, district Jalandhar in Punjab. And in 1947, when there was a partition, well, due to the circumstances, we were forced to go to Pakistan, and as the Hindu and Sikhs were forced to go to India. Before we used to live very peacefully, there was no any problem. But I don't know what happened as a partition on both sides. So I don't blame anyone. It's the both sides what has happened. And well, we left our village and went to a camp in Nakoda, which is in district Jalandhar. We stayed 3 months there in Nakoda camp, and then were moved to Pakistan. We came by it took us 7 days to reach to Wagah border. And
You can just speak from your heart.
Speak from your heart.
So we did after 7 days at Wagah border. Well, I'm sorry, I'm 90 years now, so it takes me time. And so my cousin was waiting. They were living before the partition in Pakistan in Sahiwal. So he took me and my family to Sahiwal. And in 1948, some of the members of our family went to different places like Sindh, Bahawalnagar, and all over the place. So we split our family. And in 1949, I came to Kenya. My father was there. And then I joined a post office in East African Post and Telecommunication as a technician. And I worked there until 75. And then I resigned in 1975 and came to England. And I looked for my job, which I didn't find my own job because due to the recession. So then I looked for another job, but luckily I found a job in the in the tax office. So I worked there until 1994. After the retirement, and now I'm trying to write a book in Urdu. Just wanted to tell my family and the other people what has happened in 1947. And they maybe understand. I'm not blaming anybody, but they may think this should not happen again. We were used to live like a sister and brothers, but what has happened, I can't say. So we should learn and hope in the future we will live as friendly.
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया sir आपका for sharing your experience with us, and for everyone who's of course the panelists have a very fair idea of what the work that they're doing, because they meet people who've had experiences like sir every day. But बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया साहब आपका for sharing your experience with us, right from Punjab in India to Pakistan and then to England ultimately. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. And sirs ended with this wonderful thought that people live together in harmony, and that something like this should not happen ever again, of losing your family, of losing your homes, and the migration that so happens. So that's an excellent note for us to end this discussion on. Thank you so much, Saif sir. Thank you so much to your grandfather. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing, for taking out the time first for this discussion, for coming together, for sharing your views. Thank you so much. And and of course, the audience who's joined us today from the world, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed it. And thank you very much. Good evening. Good night. Bye-bye.